Going to the NFC West, reviewing that offseason. We're going to start with the Seattle Seahawks because they won the division last year, but they did lose in the wild card to the Los Angeles Rams. I believe their backup quarterback at that time, too. um, but yeah, in terms of additions, not that many because they did trade their first round pick. I think other picks, too, for Jamal Adams. So not much they did this offseason, but they did bring in guard Gabe Jackson from the Las Vegas Raiders, tight end Gerald Everett, cornerback Akello Witherspoon, and I, and wide receiver Dwayne Eskridge in the second round. I don't know much about Dwayne Eskridge. I didn't watch him. He was one of the guys that was on my radar. I only put him there because Seattle's kind of like one of those teams, kind of like the Giants, where they just seem to find talent at wide receiver wherever. I'm not saying so. I'm just someone to keep an eye on because maybe they know what they want in him and there's some things they like from him. But they did lose a lot. Lost defensive tackle Jaron Reed, who I feel is the more underrated defensive tackles. He's a very solid defensive tackle. Linebacker KJ Wright. Lost 2 tight ends, Greg Olson, and then Jacob Hollister, who is a solid fill-in for them because I forget the guy they have. It's not. I always forget. He got injured the past years. And then wide receiver David Moore also left, so maybe that's why they got Dwayne Eskridge to kind of fill his role. And then they lost basically almost both their starting corners, Quentin Dunbar, Shaquille Griffin, and then also Carlos Hyde as well. They lost him too. But yeah, I'm going to throw it to you, John. What are your thoughts on their offseason, and do you think they can win the division again, or are they in trouble?
Just real quick, because I was having some issues on my phone. We're talking about Seattle, right?
Seattle, yes. And should be in the Google Drive. If anything, check the podcast Gmail. If you want, I can go first while you check that, because I sent the share link there. It's NFC West offseason.
I'm in the Google Drive and I don't see it. Anyway.
I can just send it to you if you want to send me
an email. If you
can
send it to me and you can go first, that'd be great.
Yeah, just send me on Facebook.
Wait, I found it.
You found it. Okay.
So you can go ahead, though. You go ahead.
Yeah. So I do worry about their defense. Jaron Reed, solid defensive tackle. The defense was already iffy last year. I know they're going to have Jamal Adams, and hopefully he's more healthy, and then the offseason helps him, be more acclimated to the system. I'm assuming they're going to be running the Seattle scheme again, the cover 3. I'm still worried about their corner play because their corners weren't great to begin with last year, Quentin Dunbar and Shaquille Griffin, and now they lost them, and I really don't see a replacement. Maybe they have a guys coming up the rank that they feel can produce better than them. And then, especially like we mentioned before, Seattle scheme dependent also on your front 4 getting home. And really all they have is Carlos Dunlap, who, he had some solid moments last year, but getting up there in age. And after that's LJ Collier, who's a first-round pick a couple of years ago, but hasn't impressed very much. So I do have – my main concern is their defense. Offensively, obviously they got to figure out and re-sign Dwayne Brown because their offensive line has been an issue, and you do not want to lose him. And I'm curious to see I should have wrote this down, new offensive coordinator. So maybe, we saw Russ Cook the first half of the season, but it seemed like Seattle just didn't adjust after that. Defenses adjusted, and Seattle just didn't have the answers to that. So hopefully with the new offensive coordinator they have, they can keep expanding on the offense, and the whole Russ Cooking, what we saw, can be season long. And I think also getting Chris Carson back for the run game will help too, because he was such a just solid running back, and someone they could rely on and always being there and just being, more than solid. But he was out most of last year, and I think that also affected what they wanted to do offensively, because Pete Carroll is an old school defensive coach. He wants to run the ball and play defense. So I think this team will go as far as their offense will take them. Now, granted, if the defense is just average, then this team could very much be, if the offense is obviously, like what I'm saying, what they were the first 8 weeks to that level last season, they could definitely be in the Super Bowl window, I think, with the weapons they have. So, what were your thoughts on their moves and how it's going to affect them going into this season?
This division is just it's really tough, man.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, I mentioned it last episode, but I think every single team's win-loss total on the Vegas odds is like 8 or 9 wins. So that's like that's just crazy. And Seattle, I think just out of all the teams in the division, I think they got worse. And so maybe I mean I'm just gonna say it. I feel like this team might finish last in the division, which is
Wow.
kind of crazy after they won it last year. But I just have a lot of concerns about their defense. I think their secondary got worse. I mean, their safeties are both pretty solid, but like I don't think that can account for the fact that their corners are pretty terrible. I have concerns about their linebacker group. I think KJ Wright is really important to what they did for a long time, and I just don't know if the rookie they took from Texas Tech last year, Jordan Brooks.
I knew his first name
Yeah,
was Jordan. I couldn't get his last name.
yeah, I don't know if he can fill in to what KJ Wright did. I mean, maybe he can. We didn't get to see a ton of him last year because I think he got hurt. But it feels like that front seven is basically Bobby Wagner. Like I have there's nobody on that D line that scares me because even Carlos Dunlap, who's their best guy, like he's an aging veteran who's on the decline, and I don't know. Like it feels like there's just a lot of lack of talent on that defense, and that's what really worries me. Offense, yes, they have DK Metcalf. Yes, they have Tyler Lock and Russell Wilson and that whole group. But as we saw last year, like there was just some games to where like just throwing some versatile defensive creative stuff at them, it really shut certain guys down. I was shocked when they played the Cardinals and DK Metcalf did nothing because Patrick Peterson was guarding him. And I love Patrick Peterson, but last year he was not very good.
Yeah.
I mean, he was being graded as basically an average corner, if not below average. And so the fact that DK Metcalf in the monster year he was having wasn't able to do much. And then, you throw on top of that, Jalen Ramsey is going to guard him twice a year. It just feels hard for me to imagine this team doing what they did last year in this division because they only lost 4 games. But
To lose in the wild card round to, I forgot his name, but the LA Rams backup.
Like John Wolford or something.
It was
like
Wolford.
that.
It was Wolford. I just don't remember his first name.
And I love Pete Carroll. I hope that the offensive coordinator changes work because I think his name was Schottenheimer. He just wasn't the guy for them.
Was it Brian?
Yeah. I don't know. I think that they're just sort of past their moment. And I think that, especially with the Dwayne Brown situation right now, like they gave a lot of money to Jamal Adams, and I think he deserves a lot of money. But it was I think he now is making over $3 million more than the next safety per year. And that just feels like a really big jump when you also have to pay Dwayne Brown, who's going to command a lot of money because he's a tackle.
Yeah.
And so it's just a hard spot to be in, man. Also, Chris Carson, his health it's always in question. They lost Carlos Hyde, who was pretty good for them over the last few years. So I don't know. I really don't know. So my gut tells me that I think they're probably going to finish last in this division. And I mean, maybe last in this division is 8 wins. So it's not like they could have a huge drop, but just with this division, I could easily see them losing 4, 5, 6 of their divisional games. And then that doesn't include the rest of their schedule. I'm not sure who's on the rest of their schedule, but I know typically like they play the Packers, they play the Buccaneers, teams like that. And so, yeah, going with Seattle to be last in this division. Maybe I'll look stupid after Russ proves me wrong. And last year I picked them to win the division, but I feel like they got worse.
Yeah. As a saying I mentioned last year with my Packers, if you're not getting better, if you're just staying the same in the NFL, you're getting worse. So that may be true here. Personally, I don't think they're going to be last. I'll mention the team I think is going to be last later on. But it wouldn't shock me because, like you mentioned, not a lot of improvement for Seattle. But we'll have to see. Maybe just internal improvement, like you mentioned on the layout, and just better coaching. Because once again, just last point, didn't really throw DK Metcalf a lot of screens. There's a lot of downfield, deep routes. So, just throw DK a bone every now and then. Just put the ball in his hands and then let him go to work. Same thing with Tyler Lockett. So we'll see if they do that and make the proper adjustments.
Real quick for their schedule, by the way, just some notable teams. They play the AFC South, who we already covered, Colts, Titans, that division. Okay. So, I mean, that they should win 2 of those games, but the Colts and Titans, that's their first 2 games. And if
Colts,
Wentz and Nelson are there, that's
Colts could be an interesting one.
If they are there, it's tough because, like you said, the Seahawks are right in their offense, and the Colts have a very good defense. And if Wentz and Nelson are healthy, it's hard to see Seattle stopping their offense because they have a lot of good running backs. They have a good offensive line. Wentz should be motivated.
Frank Reich's good OC too.
Titans, like I think they could beat their defense, but how are they going to stop Derrick Henry, Julio Jones, and AJ Brown? They're not going to put any pressure on Ryan Tannehill. And we know that when he has no pressure, he plays like he's Patrick Mahomes statistically. Not that he is Patrick Mahomes, but when he has time to throw, like the guy makes the right decisions. So, I mean, that's tough. They obviously have their division. They play the Steelers. That's a winnable game, but still tough. You know, they play the Packers later this year. I mean, their schedule is not impossible, but I don't know. They're, like I said, I feel like they got worse overall talent wise, and so we'll just have to see. Maybe I'm doubting Russell Wilson and his greatness because I think he's easily a top 3 quarterback in the league, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to see. So, all right, let's go to the next team, the team that actually knocked them out, like I mentioned last year. LA Rams, they went through a little bit of a transformation themselves. So in terms of additions, obviously the big one, adding Matthew Stafford via trade, which we'll talk about a little bit in a second, and then wide receiver Deshaun Jackson, and then draft-wise, like I mentioned, I believe it was 3 first-round picks they attached with Goff, right, for Stafford? I think
2 or 3.
2 or 3, I forget. Regardless, didn't have the first-round pick. But they did have a second-round pick, which they use on wide receiver Tutu Atwell out of Louisville, who I thought was a solid receiver coming out. But yeah, in terms of losses, like I mentioned, Jared Goff gone to Detroit, Michael Brockers, which I don't know if you remember, that was real funny, that how he was, I forgot what he said, but basically he was really high on Stafford over Goff, and then they traded him to Detroit. So he's stuck with Goff again, so that must be weird. Lost center Austin Blythe. Cornerback Troy Hill, running back Malcolm Brown, tight end Gerald Everett, who just, and then safety John Johnson, who I think we both feel it's an underrated loss there. Wide receiver Josh Reynolds, and outside linebacker Samson Ebukam. So, I'll throw this to you, John. With basically the swap of Stafford and Goff, do you think the Rams can finally get back into the Super Bowl like they did a couple of years ago?
So here, I mean, like I said, this division is really hard. So what I'm not going to look for things that I think are positives. I'm going to look for reasons to doubt them. Okay. And for the Rams, yes, they added Stafford, but I think that puts increased pressure on both Stafford and McVay because with Goff, the bar was set at losing the Super Bowl, which means the only way that Stafford and McVay can live up to expectations, in my opinion, is winning the Super Bowl. Because if Goff got you there, obviously a Todd Gurley and some of these different things, but if Goff and all his limitations was able to get there, I think that Matthew Stafford and the quarterback that people expect him to be and the talent that he is, the bar, in my opinion, should be they have to win the Super Bowl. And I don't think they will, just for starters. I don't necessarily consider them like a top tier Super Bowl contender. I think they could be, but I have to see what happens. I'm not putting them above the Buccaneers or the Packers or certain other teams in the NFC. And yeah, I think the defensive losses I think they're bigger than a lot of people are realizing. You're smiling, so I'm assuming somebody's talking in the chat.
Mike said you're.
What did he say?
He said you're. I was
he literally just said you're.
I pinned it there. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Anyway, they lost their defensive coordinator, Brandon Staley, and they brought in a guy who that we both like, Raheem Morris. But I do think that a change is always tough on a defense. They lost John Johnson, like you said. I think that's an underrated loss. They lost Michael Brockers, who gave them, really solid reps at the D-line spots. Mm-hmm. And so once again, this division's tough. I think they should win it, and I'm gonna pick them to win it, but I'm really skeptical, just because of all the changes that I mentioned. And they did have a down year last year, and they have. I mean, not a down year. They actually exceeded expectations last year,
I didn't have them
but
making the playoffs, I don't think.
yeah, but the year before they had a down year. And offensively, I would say last year wasn't amazing. I think they were carried by their defense for the most part. The dominance of Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey and the schemes that Brandon Staley was able to come up with were really impressive and landed him the head coach job. But offensively, I think they have regressed over since that Super Bowl run. And I'm just starting to wonder that. And I love Sean McVay. Don't get me wrong. I think he's one of the best young coaches, but I think questions in my mind are starting to arise about him. Is he on the same level with LaFleur, with Shanahan, the guys who he is always going to be compared with because of where they all came from together? With LaFleur, he went from Tennessee, he became the coach of the Packers, and they've gotten better. Like Aaron Rodgers just won MVP, right? With the Shanahan, I mean, it's Kyle Shanahan, right? Like the guy makes everything. And so McVay, I think this is a prove it year. Not that he's on the hot seat or anything, but with Matthew Stafford, I think there are no more excuses that you can make, because I think unfairly Jared Goff was the scapegoat. I think Jared Goff was limited, and I don't think he's an amazing quarterback, but I think that McVay kind of threw all the blame on him when maybe his offensive schemes just aren't fooling as many people as they used to be. So yeah, like I said, I think they should win the division. But I still am a skeptic a little bit.
All right. So I'm a little bit more on McVay's side in terms of the Goff situation. Granted, McVay
Which I
had
am
to
too, by
reinvent
the way.
himself. Yeah.
Just real quick, I am too. I think the Matthew Stafford trade was absolutely the right thing, because limited quarterbacks, it's hard to win.
And
that being said, I do think McVay played a part in the decline, because you can't just purely put it on Goff.
And it didn't help that and once again, you and I don't know, and I'm not sure the public knows, but I would really love to know, was he a driving force for approving the contract that they gave Goff? Because I remember even when he got signed, I was like, that's no, Jared Goff is not.
And Todd Gurley, by the way, they both got paid.
Todd Gurley, I don't really blame them, because the knee thing came up out of him. You know what I mean? He was the top running back in football.
It's
Their
true.
system was basically relying on Todd Gurley, as we saw, because once he went down, it was, it took them, they had to get back on track.
Which that's where my questions arise too, though, is the Shanahans, LaFleur, even with A.J. Dillon and Jamal Williams, they don't struggle with other running backs.
Yeah.
But McVay hasn't had the same success without Todd Gurley.
Well, and that's why it sucks too. They got Cam Akers. I think he came on at the end of last year, and that's why they felt comfortable probably to let Malcolm Brown walk. They still had Dale Henderson behind him, but now Cam Akers out for the season. I think Darrell Henderson is obviously not as good as Cam Akers, but I think he can be solid enough to do the things that that McVay wants. Maybe just not to the level that Akers would, but. I think this will be definitely a competitive team. I'm interested to see what Raheem Morris does with the defense. If it will be, obviously I think this was the number one defense last year, so it's going to be tough to stay at that level, especially with all their losses. But if they can still be a top 10 defense, and as long as Matthew Stafford, finally shows, I think he'll finally show his true talents, because it was hard to recognize him in Detroit. A bad system, never really had a run game, and now he has a good system with dependable wide receivers and a solid run game and a solid defense. Something things he never had in Detroit. Now, and I think he can handle the pressure, because he had the pressure of carrying Detroit all this time, and now he's probably sitting here going, man, I don't have to be be balling at 110% for us to win every game. I can afford to have a 90, 80% game, and we might probably still win because I have a team around me. Granted, though, yeah, I'm a little worried about maybe their O-line. Like I mentioned, they lost Austin Blythe. They've been losing some linemen. Whitworth's getting up there in age. But I'm trusting in that, McVay and the front office, they have guys coming up that they can depend on. So, um, if I had a prediction, I think this is going to be one of those teams fighting for the wild card spot. Um, and but I wouldn't be shocked if they won the division. But it just depends on like we alluded to what happens in Seattle and some of these other teams too. But yeah, this is a difficult division to evaluate just because I think we both think it's going to be a very competitive one, even more so than last year.
I could realistically see any of these teams actually winning the division if they take jumps that they are capable of taking.
All right, so enough on the LA Rams there. We're going to move on to the next team here, the Arizona Cardinals. Shout out to our good friend Kyle Wells, Cardinals fan. But yeah, so I'm going over what they went. They had another busy offseason. Obviously, the big fish, adding J.J. Watt, also brought in wide receiver A.J. Green, and then cornerback wise, brought in Malcolm Butler and Darquez Denard. Got a good center from the Raiders and Rodney Hudson. Brought in another running back, James Conner. Their first round pick, Zaven Collins at 16. He's been looking really impressive. I mean, we'll talk about Micah Parsons in another podcast, but him and Micah Parsons and Jeremiah Wosu-Koromoro, they've been impressive. I know it's preseason, but they've been popping, especially Zaven. And then also been hearing a lot of good things from Rondale Moore, their second wide receiver that they got in the second round out of Purdue, who really just fell due to injury concerns and such like that. And mainly losses, no more notable one, Larry Fitzgerald, who, as of I think today, we were talking in our group chat, kind of left the door open to maybe come back, but we'll see. Obviously, you mentioned earlier, lost Patrick Peterson, and also lost Drake Kirkpatrick at corner, lost running back Kenyon Drake, which that 1 year contract seemed to be a good decision because didn't have a great year last year. And then lost guard J.R. Sweezy, edge rusher / linebacker Hassan Reddick, and then lastly, defensive lineman Domata Pecco. So yeah, I'll throw it to you first. Again, do you think the Cardinals, they were 8-8 last year, missed out in the playoffs. They were rolling to begin the year, and then after the Hail Murray, it kind of fell apart. Do you think they can finally make the push? Can Cliff and the gang finally make the playoffs here in Arizona?
I have been mentally all over the place with the Cardinals. There was a point where I convinced myself that they were going to win the division, but then I reeled back on that point. And then there was a point where I thought this team is going to suck. Like they're going to be awful. And I'm now more in the middle.
Okay.
And I think my main worry for the Cardinals, like I said, I'm not going to look at the positives. The main positive for me on this team is they added a lot of really good veteran depth, like J.J. Watt, Malcolm Butler, James Conner. Like they just added a lot of guys. Rodney Hudson, like you said, who I think addressed a lot of needs from last year. But my main concern with the Cardinals is obviously number one, and I know that you're going to share this exact same thing, and I think it might be the team that you're going to pick to go last, is Cliff Kingsbury, because I think he sucks. I want the Cardinals to be good because our good friend Panda loves them, and they're just one of those teams that like they've never been like on top long enough to really like get hated, but they've had their moments where they were really good. And they also don't like have any of these super like loudmouth personalities, like the face of their franchise, Larry Fitzgerald, who is like beloved by everybody. So I want the Cardinals to be good, but part of me also feels like they might just be the exact same, which is weird to say because I think on a roster level, they got better. I think J.J. Watt is an upgrade. I think Malcolm Butler is an upgrade. Rodney Hudson is a massive upgrade. But I think that every mobile quarterback after their big year is schemed for a lot differently than they were the year before. I think there's a few quarterbacks who sort of escaped this, like Lamar Jackson. But even we saw a lot of the really good teams started to scheme for him this past year and had success against him. The Chiefs are one of them. When they play the Ravens, like it just looks so easy for them to shut down what the Ravens want to do. And I think a lot of teams are going to do that for the Cardinals this year. I think they're going to force Kyler Murray to throw on them. And not that he's a bad thrower, because I think he's fine. I think he's actually probably a better thrower than Lamar is. But I just think that the Cliff Kingsbury offense, the limited routes, the lack of creativity at times, the panicking under pressure when they are losing, I think it's going to hold them back. And it pains me to say that because, like I said, I kind of want the Cardinals to be good. Like I loved Kyler Murray last year. I wrote an article about how I think he could be an MVP candidate. I drafted him in so many of my fantasy leagues, and he paid off big time because he was a top 5 fantasy quarterback. I loved Kyler last year, but I would not be surprised if on this brink of stardom that people think he is going to ascend to, if he has a down year this year because of scheming for him specifically, and Cliff Kingsbury not being the strategist, like the chess player that can respond to those things. And that's going to force Kyler, a young quarterback, to have to try and adjust himself. And that's hard for any quarterback to do. So I think the Cardinals are going to finish either third, or if Seattle doesn't drop as much as I think they will, potentially even last in this division. But once again, that could be 8 wins. That's how good this division is. So I don't think I'm going to say they're going to be one of the worst teams in the league. But I think they could finish third in the division. I'd say probably 9 wins. But I don't know. At the same time, like I said, I've been all over the place with the Cardinals, so maybe they blow up. I don't know.
So, yeah, I'm in the same boat like I alluded to. I think if I had a gun to my head or whatever, I would say I would think they're going to be the last place team, but I'm with you. I think they're going to be 7, 8, 9 winish team. And yeah, I'm with you. Worried about Cliff Kingsbury, just offensive creativeness and just answers to, things. Not a lot of creativeness last year. I mean, which is, once again, like we mentioned last year, throughout the year, it was weird because year one, it's like he got better and better as a play caller and play designer. And then last year, it's just, it all went like he regressed. So that's concerning. I'm worried about the Chandler Jones holdout because that's a huge loss for them too. I mean, I'm sure if they knew that this was going to be an issue, they probably would have tried to keep Hassan Reddick. Just because as we mentioned before, edge rushers are premium, and although JJ Watt's good, he's not 20, 22 sack a year JJ Watt. So it's not like he can make up the difference for Chandler Jones. But and then Malcolm Butler, solid ad, but I'm still worried cornerback wise. I know they have Byron Murphy, but I feel like Byron Murphy's not a number 1 corner. Really, I think he's more of a number 2, and especially like we mentioned in this division, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett in Seattle, and then you got to go play the Rams with Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, and then also twice a year you have to play Kyle Shanahan with now Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and even so, maybe Vance Joseph can be more creative this year. I think another thing that's encouraging is that Isaiah Simmons gets another offseason. He didn't really get a preseason or that much of an offseason because of COVID last year. And like I mentioned, Zaven Collins is already impressing. I think he's going to be their starting middle linebacker. Now, as to where they put Isaiah Simmons, I don't know, but I think they'll figure it out. But yeah, I don't foresee this team being anything greater than a wild card team. And I think that's what Cliff has to do to save his job. Otherwise, for our friend Kyle's sake, and just Cardinals fans in general, if you don't make the playoffs this year, and especially if the offense doesn't take the next step like it should, because you have DeAndre Hopkins, you have all these weapons. You brought in AJ Brown when you already have Andy Isabella. You have a really good receiving core, really deep receiving core. It should be better, than what it has been. So, yeah, if Cliff can't get the job done, I think you have to cut ties with him before you waste Kyler Murray's time and maybe his patience. Because once again, like you mentioned, 3rd year for Kyler Murray. He has another 2 years. I'm assuming they're going to pick up the 5th-year option. He may not want to sign an extension if they waste his time and keep Cliff there. He may just want to say, I don't trust y'all to make the right decisions. I'm out of here. I'm going wherever team needs a quarterback next year. So yeah, it'll be a very interesting year for the Cardinals. I know we pretty much said that for all teams, but it is a crucial year for Cliff Kingsbury and his job, in my opinion. I think in both of our opinions. So, is there anything else you want to add, or can we go to the final team here?
Let's do it.
All right.
Man.
All righty. So, 49ers, fell off from, their Super Bowl berth, mainly due to injuries. They were last place in the division last year, record-wise, 6-10. But like I mentioned, just decimated by injuries. But had a pretty good offseason. Added center Alex Mack, who was formerly with Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta. Wide receiver Mohamed Sanu, also formerly with Kyle Shanahan in Atlanta. Linebackers Michael Kendricks and Samson Ebukam. Defensive lineman Maurice Hurst. And then draft-wise, as everyone knows, traded up, got Trey Lance at number 3 in the first round. And then third round, grabbed running back Trey Sermon, who some people are high on. And like I mentioned with the wide receivers for Seattle, I'm just keeping an eye on him because it's Kyle Shanahan. He's done this with Raheem Mostert, Tevin Coleman, these late-round running backs. He seems to have an eye for what he wants and, who he knows is going to succeed in the system. So just someone to keep an eye on. But loss-wise, Richard Sherman, lost him. Defensive lineman and former first-round pick Solomon Thomas also left. I mentioned Tevin Coleman. He also left to the Jets. Jerick McKinnon also left for the Chiefs. And then wide receiver Kendrick Bourne, who was solid for them last year while Debo was out, also left to the Patriots. So yeah, John, do you think they've done enough to be in that Super Bowl conversation like they were a couple of years ago?
No, but I do think they're a playoff team. I think they're a wild card team as of right now. But that being said, with my concerns about the Rams, if there's a team that I think overtakes them, it's the Niners. So I think they're right there. I'm just not ready to put them there yet, and I'm going to tell you why. I think their defensive losses are pretty big. I think a large reason for their success that Super Bowl year was obviously the defense. You lose your defensive coordinator. DeForest Buckner obviously is gone. Richard Sherman is gone. Nick Bosa is coming off an ACL tear. So there's a lot of shifts that are happening, and I need to see what that defensive unit can do before I'm fully ready to put them over the Rams, who I know, although once again they had some changes themselves, I know that Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald are going to be so good that they can put them in a really good spot. So I do have concerns with them, but I think their offense improved. I think their offensive line got better. I am worried what a Kyle Shanahan offense is going to look like to the rest of the league with Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, and George Kittle all healthy and ready to go, because that's just a lot of versatile weapons. We know how good their running game can be. So I think they could be an 11, 12 win team, maybe 10. I don't know. We'll see. Obviously 17 games, it kind of just throws you in a loop. So I think they should be really good, but I'm not ready to put them to what they were before that just because of all the changes from that Super Bowl team. I do think that losing Robert Saleh is going to be, which do we know who their new defensive coordinator is?
I'll look it up.
I think that losing Robert Saleh is going to be an overlooked loss, but I think he was just so key and integral to what their defense did because, as we know, with Shanahan, he's an offensive genius. And what those guys typically do, which I think McVay is actually really underrated for this, but he's really good at identifying people who are good at coming up with answers for his offense and then hiring them as defensive coordinators. Wade Phillips was amazing. Brandon Staley obviously just got hired. I wouldn't be surprised if Raheem Morris does really good for them. And Shanahan is the same, right? He found Robert Saleh. That's the guy. Saleh handles everything on the defensive side of the ball. And Shanahan just, obviously oversees everything, but gives a lot of that free reign to Saleh. And so, do you know who the defensive coordinator is yet?
Yeah,
new guy?
D'Amico Ryans. He was their linebackers coach, so he promoted from within.
Okay, so I mean, maybe there's not a lot of change there. Maybe the years already with the team, he can just keep everything that was already instilled. But yeah, I do have some concerns with their defense, but maybe their offense is able to overcome that, because I think this offense honestly should be better than their Super Bowl run offense because of, like I said, Brandon Ayuk and even Trey Sermon. Like, I think that was a really good draft pick. I know a lot of people might get really high on him in fantasy. My rule of thumb is tend to stay away from running back rooms who like to share.
Running back committees.
Yeah, and the Niners will always be that one. And Raheem Mostert obviously is a guy that you draft, but like outside of that, it's hard because Michael Hasty had a really good week, last year.
Jeff McKinnon.
What's his name?
Week.
Jeff Wilson. He had I think 4 or 5 good games.
That's frustrating.
Which, shout out to my buddy Cody, UNT guy, loves Jeff Wilson. Anyway, so I think the Niners. I think right now, I'm putting them second in the division, but I think they have the upside to potentially even just reclaim the NFC West crown, and that just goes to show you how much I truly believe in Kyle Shanahan. I think he's the top 3 coach in the league. I think probably the only guys that I would confidently put above him as of right now would probably be Andy Reid and Bill Belichick, and that's just because of their legacy and how great they've been over the last 2 decades. And even have been, dominant recently. So Kyle Shanahan's a beast, and I think that the fact that his offense got upgraded worries me for the rest of the league.
I do expect them to take a step forward. San Francisco 49ers, and like you mentioned, on offense, getting Alex Mack is, their offensive line was already up there and one of the better offensive lines, and now even better. I'm in the same boat with you. I think their offense, if anything, might be the one that carries them instead of their defense. As opposed to 2 years ago, where the defense was really the star of the show. And that's regardless of the quarterback, regardless if it's Trey Lance or Jimmy G. Like we've seen before, I'm sure Kyle Shanahan has worked with less, and especially, like I mentioned at the start, it's just unfortunate last year. George Kittle got hurt. Deebo Samuel, I think, got hurt. I forget it was week 1 or not even the preseason, but in training camp, and he was out for an extended period of time. So it's as long as they get those guys back, they're already going to be better. And I'm sure Kyle can do more offensively, and it'll be a funner team to watch. I am worried about it defensively. I'm interested to see if Nick Bosa can get back to being what he was his rookie year. Obviously Eric Armstead's good, and they have a few other good interior linemen. And obviously Fred Warner, I forgot to mention him. He's only gotten better and better each year. But yeah, like you, real worried about the cornerback situation. Because really, I don't even know. I mean, Jason Verrett had a solid year, but health has been a concern throughout his whole career. And I'm going to knock on wood for him because he's always been a solid corner. But you just never know. And then regardless, opposite of him, I don't even know who's going to be opposite of him. And so we'll have to see with San Francisco. But yeah, I expect them to be in the second-ish range in this division, 10, 11-ish wins. And once again, it just depends how, I guess, who is quarterback and how well they play. Can Jimmy G play, to the level that we all hope he can and be consistent? Or can Trey Lance, start taking the next steps and just be the dynamic player that he was in college, that we've already kind of seen in that one game in the preseason. And actually, I think they're playing right now too.
If Trey Lance is good enough to win that job from Jimmy G this year, at some point, I think the Niners probably are going to win the division if that's the case, because I think Trey Lance athletically, his arm strength, just all of that stuff is so much better than Jimmy G's, that I think if he's good enough to beat Jimmy G for the job, that's going to open Kyle Shanahan's offensive playbook so much more, because now he has a guy who can run. He has a guy who can just chuck it deep and get it deep, really far downfield. So, I don't think Trey Lance ends up playing this year, just because I don't think Shanahan wants to rush him and potentially ruin his confidence if he doesn't perform like he could. And also, like we talked about before the draft, he's the rawest of those top 5 QB prospects. But I've heard nothing but good things about him in their camp so far. But I've also heard nothing but good things about Jimmy G. So I think that Jimmy's probably going to stay the starter. But like I said, if Trey Lance is that good, I think they could win the division.
If anything, I expect, kind of like we said last year with some of the rookie guys, where they're going to go with the veteran, Jimmy G. And then if he slips up, he's not playing as well as they feel, then, maybe they'll make the change midway through the season or in a soft spot in their schedule to make that change. Because, like I mentioned last season, it's just tough. Like if Trey struggles, you can't really bench him and go back to Jimmy, because because Trey's the one that you traded up, invested a high first-round pick for, and, he's already been put out on the field, and fans are going to continue to want to see that investment. It just doesn't look good, that, we benched the guy that we just mortgaged our future for, for the guy that he was supposed to replace. So,
right.
Important to consider, if and probably when they go with Jimmy G to start the season. So, all right. So that's going to wrap it up for the NFC West. Next episode will be the AFC West, which will be fun. Both these divisions are fun. And I think the next division will be a little bit easier to anticipate / predict kind of, where they'll fall. Sorry, Raiders, Chargers, and Broncos fans. It's just the way it is. Anything else you want to mention before we call it there?
If a year from now we've blown everything and we got like all of it wrong and Seattle is, won the division and the Rams suck and all that kind of stuff, then we'll eat our words. But like I said, out of every division, I think this is the one I'm probably going to be least confident in my picks in because it's just that good.
Yeah, this division is going to cause me a lot of headache whenever we do our season predictions because I'm not. Yeah, it's like that. This division and the AFC East, these two divisions, I think those would be the top. Even the NFC East too, and not because I think they're horrible or terrible. I just think a lot of those teams have question marks. We'll get into that division another time, but. Yeah, we'll probably get back early next week. The stream went well. John's audio is fine. I'll figure out my issue on my own. But we'll be back early next week. We'll probably set the schedule again to stream with the AFC West overview and probably go over some of our position rankings that we released. So, everyone, enjoy your weekend. Enjoy week 2 of the preseason if your team hasn't already played. And, we'll see you next time.